Welcome back, friends. It's only been 1 week, and it looks like Emperor Sheldon is here and ready to make an impact on the Warhammer 40k meta. I got all the data here for you, so sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Quick reminder before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget the like button. It really pushes it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for more ways to help support the channel, I created a Patreon. It's patreon.com/warfriends. The link is in the description below. Pop over there and take a look, and any support is greatly appreciated. All right, guys, let's get to it. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had 709 players, and for the data slate, we're sitting at just over 6,150 players. The number of games played last week was just over 3,550. And for the data slate, we're just under 30,850. And we had 16 tournaments last week, bringing the data slate's total up to 110. All right, and the first thing we're looking at this week is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So anything within that range will be in green, anything slightly above will be in orange, and anything way above or way below will be in red. So coming in number 1 last week was the Emperor Sheldon at 66%. Then we had Genestealer Cults at number 2 at 58, Imperial Knights at 57, Admech at 56, and then Tyranids at 54. And at the bottom we had Tau at 38, Imperial Agents at 40, Blood Angels at 43, Dark Angels at 43, and Grey Knights at 43.6. All right, so Emperor Sheldon had a really good first week, 66%. Now it's it's only been 1 week, and it's kind of hard to tell exactly how this is going to shape out. I don't expect it to be that high of a win percentage moving forward. It's going to take a little while for people to adapt to the army and learn what to do and how to stop them. So I think we'll see that drop down as the next few weeks go by, but definitely for those Emperor Sheldon players, really good results. Genestealer Cults, 58%. They had a really good week as well. Same as Knights, and even Admech, surprisingly, up at 56%. They haven't been up that high in a while. It's nice to see them get their little time in the sun, popping up to 56%. So Sisters there, nice to see them get a little bit of bump too, up to almost 52% for the week, up in near the top armies. And down at the bottom, you have the usual suspects. You got Tau, who is just suffering miserably. I really hope something gets done with them. They're in a rough spot right now. Blood Angels and Dark Angels both at below 44%, same as Grey Knights. A lot of the Space Marine chapters are having some problems right now. Even Necrons, they've been kind of just slowly falling down the overall win percentages with 44% last week. Overall, it was kind of a pretty good spread last week. Most of the armies are in green, and there's like 4 armies at 44%. So, one win at any given moment would have popped them up into the 45%. So for the results for the week, it's not too bad. I think Emperor Sheldon definitely did shake things up a little bit, and some armies that you're not used to seeing up near the top shot up a little bit. I don't know if that had anything to do with Emperor Sheldon and everyone kind of abandoning their other armies to play Emperor Sheldon, and then you get a little bit of a chance for those other people to pick up some of the slack. But we'll see how it shapes out going forward. Next up, we have the army representation. So this is the percentage of players playing each army, and the average is about 3.6% if everybody was playing every army evenly. So anything above 3.6 means there's more players than the average should be playing it, and anything below is less players. So last week at the top, we had Space Marines at 7.5%, Aeldari at 6.6, Custodes at 6.6, and Grey Knights at 6.2, and then Asher Militarum at 5.9, rounding out the top 5. Now at the bottom 5, we have Imperial Agents at 0.3, which is pretty normal. Black Templars at 0.8, Genestealers at 1%, Drukhari at 1.4, and Admech at 1.6. So Space Marines are back on top. They were there for quite a while, but they kind of dropped off with Aeldari and Custodes being the top this whole data slate. So, with Emperor Sheldon being released and some players switching armies, Space Marines jump back up there. And then you have the usual Aeldari and Custodes who have been up near the top this whole time right there. Grey Knights, very popular lately, 6%, even though they had a really poor results. They're super popular right now. And then Guard as well is another one that hasn't been performing that well, but still has a huge player base, as always. Usual suspects down at the bottom. I feel like I say this every week, but Templars at 0.8%, Genestealer Cults at 1%. Even though Genestealer Cults did have a very good win percentage, they're always an army that's down near the lower ends of the representation. They're expensive, they're difficult to play, difficult to paint. They're not really a good beginner's army, so you only have the experienced players really bringing them. Drukhari at 1.4, also not surprising. Admech at 1.6, they are still kind of in the same vein as Genestealers. They're expensive, and they're kind of a difficult army to play and master, not very newbie friendly, but they did have really good results this week despite their lower player count, so that's good to see. Overall, it's still kind of the same way it always is: 4, 5, 6 armies, barely anybody, and then 4, 5, 6 armies with almost all the players. It is a little bit more of an even spread than it has been, but the ones at the bottom are still really struggling. And next up, we have the combined stats. So this is win rate, XOX1 percentage, and representation. And just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players with an army that went 1 loss or no losses at a tournament, so 4-1 or 5-0. It's just a good way to kind of grasp how well an army's doing, if they're getting to the end tables, or if they're kind of sitting mid-board, or maybe they go 3-2, 2-3, but they're not really getting to those top tables, going 4-1 or 5-0. So you can kind of grasp an army's sort of power or strength. The higher that is, the more people are having success with the army. Combining all the stats here, you have Emperor's Children at the top. And, not surprising, they had a 66% win rate. It was going to be hard to keep them from the top with that high of a win rate last week. Then we have Knights, Tyranids, Admech, also at the top. It's kind of a surprising one. And then Leagues of Votann. And down at the bottom, we have Imperial Agents, Templars, Blood Angels, Thousand Suns, and Dark Angels. So, like I said, Emperor's Children had a great first week. 66% win rate, 37% XOX1. So, over 1/3 of all players were going 4-1 or 5-0. So, there's definitely a lot of people having a lot of success with Emperor's Children last week. Not surprising, they had a 66% win rate. And they did have a 2.7% army rep. So, it's not quite the average, but that's quite a bit for the first week for a new army, when everyone had to go out and buy all those models and assemble all those models. I think we'll be seeing the army rep numbers for Emperor's Children creep up over the next few weeks as people get their armies completed and ready to go on the table. Imperial Knights had a 57% win rate and a 31% XOX1. So, and again, almost 1/3 of all players going 4-1 or 5-0. So that's a lot of success there. And then you have Tyranids, Admech, and Votann, all kind of sitting around the same 54 to 56% with a 25 to 27% XOX1. So they're all doing very well. 1/4 of all players are having a lot of success. And then you kind of go down to the bottom there. Blood Angels, they got 43% win rate and 7.7% XOX1. So it might have been like 1 or 2 Blood Angels players that had any amount of success at a tournament. Every other Blood Angels player was basically mid or bottom boards. Same as Thousand Suns and Dark Angels. They all struggled mightily last week. Thousand Suns had a little bit better, but still they're in a really rough spot, or they had a really rough week. Interesting, Tau had a 38% win rate, but they did have a 15.8% XOX1, so that's closer to the average for an XOX1 percentage. So Tau actually had a few players who did really well despite their win percentage. So you had a lot of players just doing really poorly and sewering that win percentage, and then you had a few players, 16% of the players there doing very well with Tau. So I'm not quite sure if it's a specific detachment that's dragging them down, or if it's just specific players who brought them who are new or didn't, or just had some, bad luck at a tournament or what have you. But they definitely had a couple players there dragging their numbers down. Sisters, again, 52% win rate almost, but they only had an 8.3% XOX1. So here's an army kind of the opposite of Tau, where they had everyone doing just average, going 3-2 for the most part, maybe 2-3 here and there, but they had very few players getting to the top board. So they're just a mid-board army right now. They're not, getting close to winning tournaments. You don't have a lot of players at those top tables, but you have a lot of players just doing okay right in the middle. Win percentage-wise, they're in a healthy spot, but ability to win and ability to take it home and win a tournament, they're not really in a position to do that very well right now. They're not, that XOX1 is showing that the army doesn't have a lot of power to finish or take it home. And then everyone else in the middle is kind of close. There's a clump of, from guard up to Necrons, is all very close to get there different ways, but for the most part, they're all right around the same averages. You have demons at 50% and then 11% XOX1, so they're kind of in the same position as Sisters last week. Just a mid-board army. They didn't really have a lot of players get to those top tables. And then you had Necrons, 44%, so much worse win percentage, but almost 19% XOX1, almost double of what demons had. So twice as many Necron players were doing good, but then you had probably quite a few more Necron players doing really poorly, dragging that number down, the win percentage down. Overall, it's kind of skewed at the top because of Emperor's Children, and Knights had a really good week as well, but Emperor's Children definitely skewed the numbers quite a bit up at the top, and then you have the Black Templars and Agents kind of skewing it at the bottom, but a good healthy range in the middle, so not a terrible week. Now we're going to look at the tournament wins for each army last week. So Emperor's Children, first week on the scene, gets 3 tournament wins. Not surprising based on the numbers to see that they've actually pulled out 3. Space Marines had 2, Orcs had 2, and Aeldari all had 2. And then at the bottom, coming in with 1 win each, is Tyranids, Leagues of Votann, Imperial Knights, Death Guard, Chaos Knights with their first win, Admech with their second, which is nice to see because last Dataslate, I don't think they got any, maybe just 1. And then Custodians pulling out another win. It is nice to see Chaos Knights. They were one of the armies they didn't have a win. They got one, so I think we're just getting closer to every army having a win at least. Orcs continue their winning. Space Marines, again, they had a pretty good week last week with 2 tournament wins, and Aeldari is not surprising either. All right, next up we have the tournament wins for each subfaction last week. So at the top there, Ember's Shoulder got all 3 wins with the Conceited detachment. For Aeldari, it was Devoted of Unid. For Orcs, it was Warhorde. Crusher Stampede getting their first week. Crusher Stampede getting their first win for Tyranids. Then we had a smattering of 1 wins across the board for all the other armies, and Trader's Lance got the win for Chaos Knights, who picked up their first win of the Dataslate. Moving on, we have win percentage by armies for the current Dataslate. So again, reminder, 45 to 55% is the acceptable win rate by Games Workshop. So at the top here, we have Emperor's Shoulder coming in at almost 60%. It's only like 2 kind of weeks worth of data, and the first week was just a couple people who played them. So that's going to take a little while to normal out. Then at number 2, we had Deathwatch, then 3 Imperial Knights, 4 Orcs, and 5 Chaos Demons. And at the bottom, we have Agents, Tau, Blood Angels, Drukhari, and Asher Militarum rounding out the bottom 5. So Imperial Knights keep climbing the chart ever so slightly. They're almost caught up to Deathwatch. They're only 0.3% behind. So those are really the top 2 armies for now until Ember's Children can get some more data and kind of smooth out with all these other armies that have 6-7 weeks worth of data. Orcs falling down a little bit, but still at 52%. Demons 51%, and then Tyranids also at 50%, still doing pretty good, kind of sneakily just hovering right around the top there. Tau at the bottom again, they had a really rough week and it just dropped them down even more. They're at 42%. Blood Angels and Drukhari are both under 45%, but they're right there, 44.6 and 44.8. So while they're not in a good place at all, they are just under that range. I would hopefully expect for both those armies to see some changes in the next data slate. And Guard had a really big fall off down to 45%. They're below Admech now, who bumped up ahead of them after a good week. And right above Admech, you have Black Templars and Dark Angels, who have been struggling this entire data slate and for most of last data slate as well. So again, a couple armies that need some changes. Space Marines and Sisters both at 46. Yeah, I guess Death Guard they're getting a new codex soon. They're at almost 50% win rate. So again, they're in a pretty good spot overall. And now they're getting a new codex that looks pretty good. So I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. We might not get too many weeks of data with this data slate after the codex is released. So we'll have to probably wait till the next data slate and I start compiling those weeks of data to really get a good idea of how Death Guard are performing overall. But I have a feeling they're going to be in a pretty good spot. The spread here overall is looking really good. A couple armies just into the orange there, but for the most part, everything is green. So while it can vary week to week, and you do have a couple armies jumping up really high here and there on a week-to-week basis, everything is fairly balanced overall. So, I mean, Games Workshop's definitely done a lot better job at keeping everything within a good range for this data slate. It has had a few data slates in the past where the top win percentage was upwards of 60% for the whole data slate. So it is nice to see that they're kind of reining everything in. No one's really running away with it. There is a few armies who are struggling more than they should, but overall, everything's looking pretty good. All right, and now we have the army representation for the current data slate. So again, the average is about 3.6, 3.7%. So another week at the top for Aeldari and Custodes. They've been kind of flopping back and forth, but they're both tied now at 7.2%. And then we have Space Marines at 7, Chaos Demons at 6.2, and Guard at 5.9. And down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.3, Emperor's Shoulder at 0.6, because there's only about 2 weeks of data, but really just 1. And Black Templars at 1, Deathwatch at 1.4, and Thousand Suns at 1.4. Just mentioning at the top, like I said, Aeldari and Custodes, they've been flopping back and forth. Custodes was number 1 for a while. Once Aeldari released, they kind of took over. Space Marines are always as popular as ever, 7%. They had the top this week, and it shows they're right near the top for the overall data slate. Demons has been very popular ever since Grommus dropped and all their different detachments and different options. They've been in a really good spot. And then you have like the usual suspects as Guard, Orcs, Necrons, and Tyranids all coming in next in that range, and they're all very popular armies who always have a really high player count. Ember's Shoulder, funny enough, is only like 1 week worth of data, and they're still ahead of Agents by almost double the player count. Agents is such a rough spot. You're never going to see them really take off as a full army, even though they are technically a full army. I just think they're going to be one of those armies that just struggle to get even a 1% player representation, even if they get fleshed out more, which I doubt they will at this point. We're still waiting for a lot of other armies to get more fleshed out, and that's not happening. And then you have Templars, Deathwatch, Thousand Suns, and Sisters, Admech, Space Wolves, and Drukhari all around 1.6%. So this kind of mirrors the weekly ones where you have like 4 or 5 armies at the top and like 8 armies down at the bottom. So those 8 armies at the bottom are the usual suspects. Some of them are getting some new codexes soon, which should hopefully breathe some life into them. Some of them already had their codex and they're still down there. So something will need to be done to balance this out a little bit, because there's definitely 7 to 8 armies where everyone plays them. I mean, if you're going to a tournament, you're going to see majority of those armies. you'd like a little bit better spread. But, this is just the tournament scene. This doesn't account for, everyone just playing at home with their friends or just going to a local game store and playing. So I assume that the spread is a lot better, as you see when you play just outside the tournament scene. But if you're going to compete, there's only like a handful of armies that really give you that chance to win. Next up, we have the combined stats for the current data slate. So it's army win rate, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So at the top, we have Emperor's Children. It's only like 1 week of data, but they're actually ahead of orcs. Then we have orcs, Knights, Aeldari, Deathwatch, and Demons, rounding out the top 5. In the bottom 5 there, we have Imperial Agents, Tau, Black Templars, Sisters, and Blood Angels. And as always, we have a huge clump of armies doing really well from 1 to like 6, all the way down from like, say, orcs to Necrons, having a lot of success, pretty good win rate, really good XOX1 percentage, and usually a pretty good representation. Although in the case of like Deathwatch, the army rep is quite low at 1.4%, but they make up for it with almost a 22% XOX1. So a lot of the players who are taking Deathwatch are seeing a lot of success. And then you have a lot of armies that are, in the middle there. They're anywhere from 47 to 50% and like a 15 to 19% XOX1. And then they just make up the difference with the army representation. Like you see Space Marines probably has no business being that high up there, but they're just such a popular army. Their army rep bumps them up way higher than they should be. And then you have armies down at the bottom who suffer a little bit because they're XOX1, like Admech. It's a 45% win rate. That is low, but they have a 17% XOX1, but they only have a 1.5% rep. But then you have the armies at the bottom who have been struggling in Soul Dataslate, and as always, Templars, Sisters, Tau, their XOX1 is considerably low. Even Blood Angels is just under 13%, and even though their rep is quite high for some of these armies, their win rate and their XOX1 is just abysmal. So you just have players struggling across the board for almost all those armies, this whole data slate. All right, and we're moving on to the army tournament wins for the current data slate, and I have it broken down week by week. So each color in the chart represents a different week for tournament results. So at the top there, we can see orcs have 20 tournament wins for the data slate. So they're definitely running away with everything, as they have been this entire time. Then we have Chaos Demons at 11, Aeldari at 11, Space Marines and Tyranids at 8, and then Asher Militarum rounds out the top 5 with 6. And at the bottom there, we're only down to 4 armies. Chaos Knights did get their first win, so now we just got 4 armies who don't have any wins: Templars, Agents, Sisters, and Thousand Sons. So hopefully by the end of the data slate, we can get everyone a tournament win. I don't have my hopes up, but it would be nice to see. Emperor's Children already has 4 tournament wins. I think you're going to see them in the top 5, even though they're only going to have 3 or 4 weeks worth of data by the time the status slate's all said and done. No one's catching orcs. They're at 20. They're almost double anyone's closest to them. Mordaka's fault, but they keep winning even with the nerfs to Mordaka. They're finding different ways to do it. So, there's still a lot of play in that army there. Okay, and the first faction focus for this week is Emperor's Children. It's only 1 week of data. I know, kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but I think everyone's excited to see how they're doing. New army, fun new toy. So we have 2 weeks of data here. Last week, 2.7% rep. The week before that, 1.2. Like I said, that was only the people who somehow got an army on the board right away. They're probably proxying some models, because I don't know how you would have everything built and ready to go the day it released. But they're there, and the win rate was still 53%. And then this next week, people had a week to get everything built and ready to go, and their win rate jumped up to almost 67%, and their army rep was 2.7. So I think, again, as the weeks go on and this army sort of normalizes its numbers, I think we're going to see them quite a bit higher once everyone gets their army built and gets it ready to go and on the table. The win percentages, when you compare them to the average, so I'm not going to really go over the meta average versus the Emperor's Children stats, because it's only 1 week, so you can't really grab too much from it, because all those numbers are based off of 7 weeks, and Emperor's Children is working off of basically 1. But you can look down at the bottom. The Conceited detachment has 90% of the player base, so definitely that's the one that everyone's sort of gravitating to. And they did have a 60% win rate. I mean, the other ones had 160%, but I think there's only like 3 players combined across all those other detachments, so it's really hard to take anything from that. But the one with all the players did have a 60% win rate. So that one's definitely the favorite detachment right now, and it got all 4 of the tournament wins so far as well. So overall, can't really look at the ranks just yet either, just because any of their player count stuff is going to be near the bottom. Overall, very successful first week, and curious to see how they do moving forward. All right, the next faction focus we have is the Adeptus Mechanicus. All right, so looking at the last few weeks here, their army rep has been anywhere from like 1 to 2.5%, and their win rates been anywhere from like 40 to 50, although this week they were up to 56%, so they did have a very good week this week. And you look at their stats versus the meta average, their win percentage is about 3% below the average, their army rep is about 2% below the average, so they're definitely hurting on the army rep side. XOX1 is right about average, which is good to see, so there's some people doing well with the army when they do play them. And you do have 2 tournament wins compared to the 4 as the average, so, you know, not the worst there. Down at the bottom, you look at the subfaction player count. Haloscreed is definitely the most popular subfaction here with over 52% of the player base. Then you have Coterie Hunter cohort coming in just over 30%, and then cohort Cybernetica is at 8, and then everything else is below 5. And then you look at the win percentages. Haloscreed does have a 47% win rate, but then you also have Coterie, the next most played one, down at 41%. And all the other detachments, their win rates are varying wildly, but there's only like a couple players for each one, so you can't really look too much into that. And I feel like a lot of their win percentages is kind of being dragged down by Coterie. They have 30% of the players, but only a 40% win rate, so that's quite a large player base to be having a 40% win rate. Where you look at Haloscreed, they have 52% and they're at 47%. So even if Coterie was closer to 46, 47, I think their overall win percentage would be upwards around 47. It'd be a couple percentages higher, right about the average. So there's definitely quite a large contingent of Coterie players who are struggling here, and they're kind of, I think, dragging the win rate down a little bit. And then you go look at their ranks at 28 against all the other armies. Total players, win percentage, everything's pretty much the lower half of the middle. You know, they're in the bottom 8 of pretty much everything except for XOX1 and tournament wins. So while they don't have a lot of players or a high win percentage, those players who do showing up, there's a select few of them who are doing fairly well, getting some good results and actually winning some tournaments. And both their subfaction tournament wins have been split between Coterie and the cohort Cybernetica. So it's kind of interesting that Haloscreed, their most played detachment, actually doesn't have any tournament wins. Admech did do well this week, but I don't think it's going to continue. Nothing changed to make them better. They're kind of in between of what they want to be or what they should be. They're costed like a horde army, but they're really not supposed to be. Should be more of an elite army, and it's just leading to this really, you can't just keep dropping points to make an army better. At some point, they're too cheap, and then it's just defeating the purpose, and it's breaking how the army's supposed to play. So they need to find a way to cost them and give them rules that is like indicative to the way the army's supposed to be played. More elite than your average person, less elite than a space marine. They should be costed appropriately. They shouldn't be costed like guardsmen. That's not what they're supposed to be, and the rules aren't designed for that. And they need to make proper rules and give them the punchiness and the tankiness where it's needed to actually give them some utilities and some survivability and some damage to actually do well and start performing and keeping up with some of these top armies that are coming out. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more. If you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, you can go visit my Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. The link is in the description. That'll be it for this week. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.